You've seen rolled buttercream on cookies, but what about cake? Everyone's been asking, and let's just say, my first attempt, kind of a flop. But I figured it out and I'm showing you exactly how it works. In this video, I'm breaking down my experience, revealing the cake featured in my free rolled buttercream guide. You can grab it at trendymint.com, and teaching you how to make these ultra realistic geode rocks. Let's get into it. Hey there, welcome back. And if you're new here, I'm Ashley and this is Trendy Mint Baking. Here you'll find inspiration, resources, and freebies to help you grow as a baker. Check out trendymint.com for even more. If you love baking, creating, and making cookies that stand out, consider subscribing for more sweet videos. Now that we know rolled buttercream can be used on cakes, let's talk about how to make it look realistic. If you've ever played with Play-Doh, then trust me, you can totally work with rolled buttercream. It's just that easy. I'm mixing up a few different colors to create a natural rock texture for the cake's outer crust. And then we'll move on to blending the deep, vibrant colors for the Earth's core. Layering, slicing, rolling, it's all about building those natural organic layers that make this cake look like a real geode. Just a reminder, you can grab the free rolled buttercream guide at trendymint.com and I will link it down below. In the guide, you will find common questions and answers. You'll find the rolled buttercream recipe that I use for cookies. You'll also find a cake-specific rolled buttercream recipe. There are many different decorating techniques included, and if you're a business owner, there's also a social media kit so that you can introduce rolled buttercream to your customers. One thing I will say, I will give you a little tip here, is that when you're mixing this up, I would wear gloves because the food coloring will stain your hands and it easily transfers to your other icing. I'm just working on top of a rolled out piece of parchment paper that I had sprinkled with some cornstarch. Now, this is when I had first started working with rolled buttercream, and since this video, I have discovered that I would rather use powdered sugar instead of cornstarch because I feel like the cornstarch dries out your buttercream a lot more than the powdered sugar does. And you'll see later on here when I show the finished cake where you can tell in some areas where it's dried out. Now at this point, I layered all my colors on top of each other, sliced them, set them beside each other, rolled them out, and I just kind of do this several times to get the look that I want. I ended up deciding I wanted more of a solid color for the outside, so I kind of worked through that and that's what I end up with. But this is the same process I used to create the colorful geode portion of the cake. I just layered those brighter colors on top of each other, sliced them, put them beside each other, and then rolled them out. Now for the crystal part of the cake, I used rock candy that I purchased off Amazon, and I had purchased two different sizes. There's some larger rock candy and it just comes in a bag of rocks. It's not on a stick like you typically see rock candy. It's in a bag, and I bought the larger size rocks and the smaller size. Looking back, I probably could have got away with just using the larger rocks. And I just used some buttercream in my carved out portion of the cake, put some buttercream in there, and then pressed my rocks into it. I then used some food coloring that was watered down and a paintbrush and colored the rocks that way. And then to make it shiny, you can just coat it with some corn syrup. For your cake, you're going to want to crumb coat it with some regular buttercream icing. And then to attach the rolled buttercream onto it, since the buttercream frosting does set up, it does crust over, I brushed on some corn syrup onto this crumb coating and then put my rolled buttercream onto it. Okay, we're just getting that crumb coating on our cake now. I'm just smoothing it out with this bench scraper just to make sure it's really smooth. And my buttercream I rolled out to put on here, I actually rolled it pretty thick. Honestly, I really didn't know what I was doing when I did this. So it was just trial and error. If I covered another cake with buttercream, I would roll it out much thinner. I believe I did 1/8 of an inch, and I would definitely go down to 1/16 of an inch, especially for around the sides. Even on the top, because I felt like it got kind of heavy and I ended up with some bulging around the sides. Another tip is that I ended up and rolled this out and I should have measured. I thought I had enough to go around my whole cake and I didn't. Thank goodness this cake is kind of a rough and tough, rustic looking outdoor cake with some natural elements, and part of the cake was carved out. So that worked to my advantage for sure, since I did not measure and I did not have enough to cover the whole cake. Now to help you kind of work with the buttercream a little bit, if it gets too warm, it's going to be very difficult to move around at all. So I would probably pop it in the fridge or freezer for just a bit, because you don't want it to be solid either, because then when you try to put it up on your cake and curve it around the edges of your cake, it's going to end up cracking or just not adhere because it's too solid. Now I'm just making the top part of the cake. I'm making them separate. I'm going to roll this out and then I'll use a guide on top of it to help me get a perfect size circle that I can place on top of my cake. So this is where I was just brushing on some corn syrup on top of this regular buttercream that I crumb coated the cake with. The buttercream on the cake will crust over, and I didn't want it to cause the rolled buttercream not to stick or to separate in any way. So I just brushed on some corn syrup to give it a little extra power to adhere together. And now I put this top on the cake and I'm just going around with a knife and trimming off the excess. Now putting the top on the cake was super easy. Yeah, I ended up with a nice flat even top and I really like how it came out, except for you can tell in this picture that it does look kind of dried out because you can see some cracking. Kind of reminds me of elephant skin, which, I mean, hey, if you're making an elephant cake or cookie, there you go. This is why I wouldn't use cornstarch again to roll it out and work with it. I would use powdered sugar since it has less cornstarch in it, but also will help it not to stick. So now I am mentally preparing myself for getting this buttercream off of the parchment paper onto the sides of this cake. It was a little bit nerve-wracking to even think about doing this. And so I put my parchment paper down and I cut a flat edge, which would be the edge for the bottom part of the cake. And I'm just anxiously awaiting how this is going to go. My thought was that I could use this fondant tool to smooth out the top of my cake where it had appeared to have cracking, but it really didn't work that well. It did not solve the cracking issue or make it form together any better. So I popped that rolled buttercream in the freezer for just a minute, and now I've taken it out and here we go. So this is the part that was inevitable, but so nerve-wracking, and if you have an extra pair of hands around, this will be a great time to volunteer somebody to help you. I'm just going around checking the cake again, and then I'm just going to pick all of that up on the parchment and just press it up against the cake and kind of press it all around the cake and smooth it out the best I can. As you can clearly see, my rolled buttercream did not reach around my cake. If I had rolled it out thinner, it would have, but I really like how the texture and the variation turned out on the frosting part. Since this buttercream is kind of heavy, I would make sure you have a solid filling or some support inside of your cake to help hold it up. The part where I was unable to cover the cake is the part I'm going to go ahead and carve out to expose the inside of the Earth's core. I do feel like the edges up at the top could have been blended in a lot better, and maybe if it was all the same color, it would be a little easier to do this. But I knew I was going to be adding in rocks to cover some areas, and that's what we're going to be talking about next. I cannot wait for you to see how these rocks are made. Here's a close-up view of the rocks on the cake. Now what you're going to need is some white chocolate, some coarsely crushed up Oreos, and food coloring, mainly black or gray. So you need to melt your chocolate, divide it into 3 bowls, color your chocolate different shades of black or gray, and then divide your Oreos amongst those bowls. Mix that together until the Oreos are coated, and then you'll want to combine all of these into one big bowl and mix them together, but not too much. You don't want it to form a solid color. So once you've done that, you'll pour it out onto some parchment paper or silicone mat for it to harden up and set up. And then you're left with some hard white chocolate Oreo mixture. And you just want to coarsely break it apart or chop it. You don't want it to have perfect edges by any means, and you want it to have some bigger pieces and smaller pieces, just so it's more realistic looking. And here's our final project. I think this cake actually turned out pretty good. I am glad it was the theme it was, and it was for a friend, so there wasn't as much pressure as if it was for a customer. But I would definitely try this again with a few tweaks along the way. See you next time.